All right, and with that, that is my cue. Hello, folks. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to this afternoon's Confidential Insight webinar, Disaster Recovery in a New COVID-19 World. We are joined today by Brian Waltermeyer. He's CEO of Asgard Managed Services, and he will be sharing three kind of key focus areas related to the increase in attacks and ransomware in a COVID world. He'll be going through those with you shortly. Before I hand the mic over to Brian for further introductions and to kick off this afternoon's session, just a couple of housekeeping items I wanted to cover here. So first, you've probably noticed that your lines have been muted. This is obviously to prevent background noise while Brian presents, but if you do have any questions for Brian, please do feel free to send them through via the WebEx chat or the Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring those and we'll be sure to address them after the presentation. We'll leave some time for that. We'll also be making Brian's deck available to all of you after this presentation, so look for that in your email as well. And with that, thank you again for joining us, everyone, and I will hand the mic over to you, Brian.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Kristen. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. You sound great.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for having us. Asgard and Gartner discussed just a lot of developments that we've been seeing in the real world since COVID struck, say February, March of this year and through today. So we appreciate Kristen and Gartner for inviting us back to kind of exemplify what's been happening at the current state of IT and security. In general, it hasn't been real pretty. So that's why we're here. All right, next slide. So this is me, 2-second intro. We've been doing a lot of work in disaster recovery for the longevity of our business. We've done, thousands of disaster recovery and business continuity plans. There's a few interesting points about some of the accomplishments of Asgard. The first one is the secure to maintain technology. That's all about secure connectivity, secure communications and file sharing. Pretty cool tech. We're the first to license it, and we're the #1 reseller today. We've done some unique things in the cloud, and we're proud to say that our clients and our DR clients are 100% success rates for recovery. Today we're going to discuss some things around, we're going to focus on increase in attacks in the COVID world, how to prepare for them, what we're seeing, and what that would look like in the form of a plan, and some technologies that would support the resiliency that people need today. And then the latter part of the presentation, which will be how to recover after an attack, some of the key things that we see as consistently showing success for our clients to recover. So we'll talk for about 40 minutes. We'll have some time at the end for questions. Again, we really appreciate everyone's time. Feel free to post questions in the chat. Kristen will moderate, and we'll dig in here. Okay, so thanks again, guys. Here we go. So the majority of Americans are working from home. I'm sure maybe even most of the people online here today are still working from home. This is the new COVID world office space. This is a Zoom call. We're doing dozens of these a day. Companies like Twitter and Square are now recommending permanent work from home policies, right? So people don't even have to come back afterwards. And the reason is, obviously the social distancing and the COVID concerns, but also there's a large business incentive where I think it's about 11% reduction in expenses for employees who even work part-time from home. As far as the business is concerned, on the employee side, employee satisfaction goes way up by not having to commute to the office every day, and so on and so forth. So kind of some obvious things, but that's the reality, and COVID has kind of kickstarted that recognition in the world in a big way. So I think we're going to see a lot more of working from home, working remotely, and these types of Zoom calls. So this is a stat we found according to Gartner, and we thank you guys. A recent survey shows that a majority of CFOs expect some employees to work from home permanently. And when you get on Zoom, it's great. It's similar to what we're doing now, obviously, but 94% of malware is delivered via email, and over 80% of attacks come by way of phishing. So when people are at home, they don't have the IT oversight, and especially in this instance with COVID, it happened so fast that many companies were really unprepared. So remote connectivity is the weak link in our new world, and it's something that needs to be addressed, and I'm sure everyone here online is sharing those same concerns. So there was a survey done by Datrium. February to present day, our company, Asgard, has seen about 20% of our clients experience some type of disaster. They're all malicious. There hasn't been any, natural disasters. These are all malicious attacks, whether it's some type of malware, generally ransomware, data being locked up, encrypted, and being sold back to them, or just generally destroyed. So we've seen about 20% of our clients in the past February to today get hit. It's a lot of business for us. It's a lot of problems for our clients, and that's really what we're going to focus on today is kind of what's happening. I think probably everyone here is somewhat aware of this, maybe even experienced some issues yourselves, but how do we address that going forward? How do we protect ourselves? How do we become more resilient? And what can be done about it for the future to avoid this? So, for us, that's about a 400% jump in the typical disaster declaration rate, if you will. So it's really astounding, and it's kind of hitting people when they're down, but that's what criminals do, right? And we're seeing it in a big way, and the stats here on the screen really reflect that. So this data is from just this year, so it's current, right? Right. So listen, when there's a disaster, everything stops. We see it time and time again that if a company doesn't have a plan in place, they have some backups, they have a rough idea of how this works, they haven't ever really had to test it or rely on it completely. It doesn't really measure up when the pedal hits the metal type of thing. So when there's a full-blown emergency, if there is not a plan in place, it's really chaotic and things multiply. And we'll dip into a real-world example here in a second of a very large healthcare organization that we had to support through their recent ransomware attack, and some of the nuances around it, which I think everyone will find some value in. So, right here, over half of IT departments say disasters consume 100% of the resources. It's more than that because it spreads beyond IT. It spreads to the C-suite. It spreads to the employees. It spreads to vendors. It spreads to overseas partners. And as things go and take longer and longer, the stress increases. The time frames slow down. People get angry. They're losing money. If you've never been through a full-blown outage, or hopefully not a ransomware attack, but if you haven't, we'll give you some insight right here to what one feels like. So we're going to touch on, like I said, some keys to disaster recovery. There's several things that every organization needs to remain resilient and be prepared at the highest levels for their own business continuity and maintaining cash flows. Some services that we like are next-gen AV with ransomware, AI, and quarantine features built in. We use a product and sell a product called SentinelOne. We believe it's best in breed in the next-gen AV space. It even has the ability to back up and restore backups from the machine itself. So if the ransomware is detected, not only is it quarantined, but it can be, destroyed data can be restored quickly through the program itself. So it's almost a little mini disaster recovery program in itself. It's not comprehensive of an entire environment, but it is somewhat useful if you can isolate it fast enough. Automated patch management. It's about 60% of vulnerabilities come by way of patches not being pushed and implemented. And one easy way to do that is just to turn on your Microsoft automatic updates, or to employ a third party like us for maintaining that for you. And when we do that for clients, there's a lot more things that happen with that. But just getting your patches installed on a regular weekly basis, it really goes a long way. Then there's obviously the plan that we'll get into a little bit, in disaster recovery with cloud backups, cloud offsite, third party, highly resilient data centers built for resiliency and high availability. And we'll also speak to that a little bit. So the disaster recovery plan, it can really make all the difference between shutting down the entire operation and smooth sailing during and through and after a disaster. So we created this, it's called the New Standards of Disaster Recovery. This is about 7+ years of real world action, feet on the ground, in the trenches with clients. Not only just testing and working with just about every a backup and DR software out there, but implementing the hard knocks that us and our clients have learned along the way into one plan. So this would be complementary to a business continuity plan, which obviously do include components of DR, but there are so many more pieces that need to be covered than what's covered in your typical business continuity plan, or say like an ISO required plan. So we strongly recommend a separate disaster recovery plan for any business, even if they have a business continuity plan in place. So we will, one second. So let me back up. So I was going to give you guys a little anecdotal information about the healthcare client of ours who had a lot of issues. They had a plan. They didn't have an updated plan, but they were attacked with ransomware in early March. And they were hacked in early March. Now, the point of this is not to make anyone look bad, because people remain nameless. But the point is to show how letting things go, or not communicating effectively, and taking things into account into a plan can exponentially damage what could be a rather smooth recovery. So these guys, the IT manager and his team, they're a longtime client of ours, cloud backups, some on-site backups, and the cloud backups are managed by us and our data center, and the on-site backups are managed by them through our software. So they were hit with some type of malware, which we aren't exactly sure what it was at this point even, in March. At that time, they informed us through our ticketing system that they needed to stop their backups, which is a very strange request, but clients don't always tell you why they are doing something, right? And it's the client's prerogative. We can ask, is everything okay? Is there anything we should know? But we're not here to push. We're here to support. And so backups were stopped in early mid-March because unbeknownst to us, they'd been hit with some type of attack. And the IT manager and his team decided to try to rebuild some machines on their own. And they thought turning off the backups would segregate infected data. But in fact, they're already segregated regardless, so that didn't need to happen, but that's what they did. So they didn't tell us why. They just said, turn our backups off. Took them about a week or so, and they asked us to turn them back on. And now anyone who knows, an environment of 20 terabytes or something of that nature, it takes some time to back up over the internet. And even if you're only accounting for delta, which are the changes in the data, it can take a significant amount of time to make sure those new updates are saved in a usable way in the cloud. So just to get their backups back to normal took about a week. So they interrupted their backups for a week to try to navigate this malware issue on their own without telling us. Reactivated the backups, and that took about a week to get their backups caught up. Now, their service level designates that they have their data fully restored and powered off virtual machines. So they are in a highly ready state of recovery at any given point. Except for, as you can probably see where I'm going, in this instance, because they turned off their backups, they interrupted the backup process. There was extra time to get the backups caught up, and as such, the next step is rebuilding those machines with the backed up data. That takes a little bit of time as well, just with the sheer amount of about 20 terabytes these guys have over 10 or so machines. So it's not that this couldn't be done, it's just the amount of time. So because the backups are interrupted, because it takes time to restart those backups and catch up on the backups, and it takes some time to restore those backups to the virtual machines so they're ready to fail over as fast as you can turn on that machine after a declaration of disaster, they weren't ready when the ransomware came back or decided to lock up their files. So now, here you have a good-sized healthcare company, a good-sized IT environment, an intelligent IT multi-person staff with disaster recovery plan, albeit outdated, and with a very strong disaster recovery on-premise and cloud-based service with near immediate failover, has been knocked to its knees because of some poor decision-making on the side of the IT manager. So when the ransomware hit their local environment, the restores on our side were not completely rebuilt just because of the time it takes to move data and to restore the data into a usable state. Now their on-premise environment is completely encrypted. They're being held for ransom, and they're still not telling us what has happened. All they're telling us is they need to fail over some machines to the cloud. That's it. So I'm stressing this again, not to make anyone look bad, but just express the importance of communication and to be on top of your business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan and maintain that continuity. This is kind of the root of this whole process. So when we went to fail them over, some of the machines, the larger machines, as you can imagine, weren't fully restored, and we couldn't turn them on at the flip of a switch like their SLA requires. Now, they interrupted it. It's not our fault, but what we care about is getting them running, right? So as this process goes on, and we're waiting to finalize the restores, it finally happens, within the day. It wasn't forever, but minutes are thousands of dollars with a company like this. So they're losing thousands of dollars a minute, millions of dollars a day, and we're just sitting around waiting for something that was completely intact but was interrupted by choice by their IT team. So long story short, you can see how this bleeds out of the IT department to the C-suite. Why is this taking so long? What's happening? And so on and so forth. An insurance company now has to come in to run forensics analysis on what happened. They're having to pay deductibles, et cetera, and this is a business shutdown. So instead of being able to fail over, which they were prepared to do pre-backup interruption, just over a period of about 2.5 weeks, they went from fully restored machines to not fully restored machines, and their on-premise environment is fully encrypted, and they shut it off to protect extended network vulnerabilities. So the point is even with the best laid plans, if the plans aren't followed, it could be impossible to meet your recovery objectives, even though you think you have everything in place. So that's an anecdote about not just having a plan, but following the plan. So we'll get into a couple points now, key points that we feel every person should be concerned with. And if people have questions about this specific healthcare attack. We can discuss it at the end, but today they've been running in our cloud for a couple months, business as usual, but I don't even know how many hours that they've spent. I spoke to their IT manager today, and he's still getting things straightened out on their side 2 months in. So even though the rest of the organization is running as normal, they're in the cloud, his day is still haywire. So one of the first key points we'll mention, what's your recovery plan objective? This could be somewhat similar for businesses, or it could be very different. We've seen huge companies who have a downtime tolerance of a week or more. And we've seen other ones, small law firms who couldn't be down for a minute. So what does it mean for your organization, right? I mentioned downtime tolerance. This is it. And that little flame in the middle, it's really not a joke. If you haven't been through a prolonged downtime with questions and compounding injuries and factors, it gets very, very stressful. It gets very stressful for even us as an outside IT team working around the clock with our support. And it gets chaotic and it gets heated and people get mad for good reason. But so one of the biggest reasons we hear organizations don't have disaster recovery plan is due to the sheer complexity. If you know your objective, if you know your maximum downtime tolerance, which is called your recovery time objective, you'll be able to more efficiently regain operations after a disaster. So there's things that we have to consider: prioritization of your most critical applications, how much available bandwidth do you have, what is the type of disaster that you're facing. These are all, this is why I say when a disaster recovery plan is complementary to a business continuity plan, because you start to cover things at more detail and in the disaster recovery plan. So the disaster recovery plan is more of your playbook. Business continuity plan is more of your strategy for the entire organization. So, we've seen people try to use a BC plan for failover. It may work for your organization, but it may not. So we know a DR plan will work because that's specifically what it's designed for. So downtime tolerance key, recovery time objective needs to be defined. Coordinate your backup strategy. I'll give you another anecdote. Regional insurance provider we provide a disaster recovery service for, and they use 3 core services to back up their machines. Very smart. It's highly resilient, it's strategic, and it can be tactical. So the customized strategy gives them triple redundancy, and the plan that we put together and incorporate them all makes all the difference, knowing at what point you have to use what service, right? So if you look at the chart, backup frequency, they're using the VMware for their daily backups. They're using StorageCraft for their on-site hourly backups, and they're using our EverShield, EverSafe disaster recovery service for the cloud backups down to every 15 minutes. So it's really customized for every business. And one of the things that we see a lot is that companies, they come across something like a StorageCraft or Veeam, and like, oh, this is really great. And they put it into place and they put some backups in a different office. And sure, that's diversified, but what if your network is affected? There was a big attack in 2018 with a shipping company called Maersk. I think they have something like 115 offices on every continent. And they're all basically on the same network. So they got hit with ransomware across the world, and the only reason they were saved was because their African offices had a power outage. So they were literally air-gapped by way of complete luck. So you might have some good strategies, but you need to incorporate them into a plan. All right. So go to the next slide. Data retention policy. Again, these are just some of the highlights of a DR plan to show differences, because many people are familiar with a business continuity plan, but many people just kind of overlook all the detailed nuances that we're honing in on right now, because they just don't believe that they need it. They've never had to use it, and how would you know unless you've gone through it? So look, we've produced, like I said, thousands of DR plans for our clients, and we know how hard it is to account for the unexpected. Even things like compliance. States have different compliances for different industries. For example, in Texas, healthcare laws, HIPAA laws are usurped by state laws, and they have to be held for about 7 years. So not for about, they have to be held for 7 years. So it's always important to consider your data retention, what you need, not just for recovery, but for compliance or for different possibly tiers of money savings. You don't need every bit of data you've ever created in a completely failover scenario. If that data has been archived, you might be able to save a significant amount of money by archiving your data in the cloud and not having it immediately retrievable in a restore situation, but it could be retrievable in a little bit longer amount of time. So it's very important to understand what your retention needs are, and that's really based around your business itself, what you're doing, and what you might need the data for. Next slide is testing. So we stress semi-annual testing and updates to the disaster recovery plan. It's like a regular visit to your doctor, right? This is where you find the discoveries and changes within your organization that may have a material impact on your disaster recovery readiness, right? So something as simple as an IT staff being let go, it has to be noted in the DR plan. One of the clients of ours that got hit with, I think it was the evil ransomware, just in March, they had let one of their IT guys go, I think in January, and they got hit with ransomware a couple months later, and not coincidentally, the IT manager who was let go had the passwords for their server backups. Now, they didn't have an up-to-date DR plan, so the passwords in it were old, and it took them about 48 hours longer to recover than it should have. I'm not going to tell you how we got into their servers for them, but I'm just going to say that a simple oversight, letting somebody go, not ensuring that your passwords are on a password list, not ensuring that your partners, like managed service companies, are apprised of those passwords, it can make all the difference between an immediate or a few hours to recover, a few days, or never recovering, right? So very important to test and update the plan. A good DR service, just so you know, should include testing. We include 7 days of testing or cloud failover in the event of a declared disaster for every calendar year. So you could use that for 1 day test and several days failover in the cloud, included in the service level, no additional costs, no concerns, no approvals, just get me in the cloud. It's a disaster. We'll work it out later. They're not incurring any additional expenses. So there are services out there that have that. Strongly stress that you have that and get everything in place beforehand. The next slide is all about failover. So again, we're just touching on some of the high points of the plan, but failover is where the rubber meets the road. We support a large organization who provides services to many other organizations. They store lots of billing and HR records. when we dug in during their assessment phase, we learned the difficulty they had during previous emergencies getting their critical applications back up and running in sufficient time. The reason? Well, like most other organizations, they never put the details together to ensure their failover success. In their case, they specifically needed networking instructions for their cloud servers. So we've dealt with this many, many times. This is actually probably one of the top, at least the top 5 issues we see, that a company who doesn't have a plan, that means that we don't have their IP schemes for when they need to fail over into the cloud. Now you might say, well, if they're replicas or exact copies of what's the on-premise environment, you just use what's already on those machines. Well, that's great, except if the other machines are still recognizable. Now you start having IP conflicts, and now you're digging into networking, and that causes other issues. And at the end of the day, it causes delays. And that's a huge problem. So, things like that need to be drawn out ahead of time. So, it's a small oversight, but it's enough to cost 24 hours of downtime during an outage. So it's a strong consideration, just one of many while you're failing over. Test your failovers, have the plan, work with your partner or work with your internal team to overcome these obstacles that you don't perceive ahead of time until you actually get into it. The last major piece that we recommend in disaster recovery preparedness and disaster recovery planning and service is cloud failover. So data centers were built to provide 100% uptime availability, and having the cloud as an ultimate failover location not only ensures that your business will have all the required applications and data to maintain business continuity regardless of the outage, but also the potential to run your environment from the data center for an indefinite period of time. This is another point that is always overlooked. People think, well, I can fail over within a day. I can fail over within an hour, or 2 days is my RTO. That's great. And I'm sure that can be achieved, but hardware is the number one cause of data loss, hardware failure. And if your hardware fails, not a ransomware, it's your hardware fails, hard drives crash, it takes away the presence of your physical machines in your office. So now you're in a disaster recovery failover scenario. And you say, well, sure, I still have my machines, just let me get a new drive built or a new node, storage node, and we'll restore to that. That's fine, but if it grows bigger than that, you need to run from the cloud. And just having that comfortability to know that you can stay in that cloud uninterrupted with security for as long as you need to regain your business operations, it's really the number one form of resiliency that we believe that you can have. And even if you're running in the cloud now, having backups and the ability to run from another cloud, if something were to happen on that equipment, is still considered an intelligent DR plan, in our opinion. So that's really the last component of the DR keys that we'll discuss. A couple more slides here. The results of being prepared really speak for themselves. Fortunately, we've been including disaster recovery plans in our service levels since we started doing this, and our clients have a 100% success rate. So that's 7+ years with 0 unrecoverable outages for our clients. And I think the title of this, kind of speaks for itself. 96% of businesses with a tested DR plan fully recover from an outage. Now, a couple of examples you heard me say, like, well, it took longer and this and that. They can go really smooth if all the pieces are laid in place ahead of time. They're tested. You have a supporting team. You're communicating effectively with the team. The team has a concurrent DR plan. So if all those pieces are in place, they're tested, you have a 96% success rate. With us, it's 100%, but the industry average is 96%, still very strong. Obviously, you don't want to be one of the 4% that hasn't been able to recover, but a little bit of effort in this endeavor goes a long, long way. And trust me, we've seen it dozens and dozens of times. This is just kind of our philosophy around disaster recovery and plans. There's no one-size-fits-all resiliency solution. That's why we approach every client as a unique business through focused resiliency, consultations, and by creating a resiliency framework specific to their business continuity requirements. Their recovery is now 100% assured. So that's how we look at this process. That's how we look at a DR service. That's how we look at our clients. We want them to be able to recover as fast as possible, exactly as they need to. The last slide I'll put here is, we'll offer, the Gartner group here, a free DR assessment. And if anyone's interested, you could click on this link. We'll put it in the chat. Kristen said she would be sending out the PowerPoint to everybody. So if anyone is interested, it's a free assessment. We have a conversation with one of our DR sales engineers about where you are now, where you need to be, what's covered in your current plan. It's free time, free points to fill in the gaps. And if anyone has the interest, you can go to that link. There's a case study of some things that we've done there with the healthcare organization, and some of the things that we did for them. And at the bottom, there's a way to schedule. Also here, obviously, is an email and a phone number if you'd like to get in touch with us. Again, this is offered to the Gartner CISO Coalition group to just help out. So that's the end of the presentation. Open up for questions, and appreciate anything anyone has to ask.
Brian, thank you for that. And we did have a couple questions come through, so I will just start calling them out to you. First one, our backup retention policies haven't been updated in 10 plus years. Is there a best practice or standard on backups and how long they should be saved?
Yeah, it's a good question. The retention policies are very important for a number of reasons, but as far as requirement, there's really only two. There's going to be one for your business, and there's going to be one if you have to follow some type of compliance measure like HIPAA or FINRA or PCI, something like that. Now, as far as the business goes, we see things across the board. The average of our clients, we do daily backups. It might be more than once a day, but daily backups at a minimum, held for 28 days, and then retained on a monthly basis for 12 months. So for the most current month, you'll have 28 backups for every day. And for the previous month, so if we're in June, you're going to have 28 backups for June. If you want to go back to May, you're going to have one backup, which is the last image from May. So if you want to say, hey, I want to recover May's data, okay, you have one image, not 28. That cuts down on storage and costs, and so on and so forth. So that's the average, but we have build outs for everything. We have clients who have to conform with HIPAA, 6, 7, 8 years, depending on the state. And, they don't want to pay a lot of money to have it all, in a ready failover state. So we archive it on like a tier 3 cold storage. The pricing goes down. The data is still easily retrievable. But, so, and that's why I keep stressing, like everyone, it's different for everybody, even though there's averages and lots of people have to have the same thing. But you have to look at it on a case-by-case business basis based around what your business needs are, right? Does that answer?
Brian.
Yeah.
We had another one come in, and this one is, so COVID-19 has moved focus of continued testing of DR plans due to increasing DR resources in an unintended way. How long do mature organizations put DR testing on hold during something like a pandemic? Have you seen any of that?
Putting testing on hold?
Yeah.
Yeah. we've seen everything get put on hold. I mean, like that one example I gave of the healthcare organization who got hit with ransomware, they put their backups on hold. Now, that wasn't because of COVID. That's because the IT manager made the decision to do so to try to rebuild something. But no, we do not have any clients who have put any backups on hold. It's like putting your insurance on hold before you go skydiving or something. Now, are they testing? Not really. People are kind of in a bit of a survival mode, but they are still maintaining their backups. We're still supporting them. And like I said, we've been engaged with many clients for recoveries based on ransomware attacks. So specifically, no, we're not doing a lot of testing at this moment. Could we? Yes. We'd be happy to if a client wanted to test, but we're not seeing a lot of clients request that at this moment. No, but if you're unsure of where you are, I would strongly suggest doing it if you have the bandwidth and ability to do it right now, but you might not because of what's happening. But it's always better to be prepared.
Thanks, Brian. Next question, what is the best way to prevent your backup and replication targets from getting locked up with ransomware?
Well, there's different platforms. The product that we recommended in the beginning of the presentation called SentinelOne, it's an endpoint detection and response. Basically, it quarantines ransomware. It's the next generation antivirus that uses AI to find known ransomware extensions and mutations and attacks that are currently ongoing, and it searches for those. So if one of your machines starts to get hit with, I think one of the ones we got hit, our client got hit with was .roger, and once the application recognizes that file extension starting to be saved over files, it moves to delete the malware and quarantine those files. So that's an EDR application. They're not really expensive. You can get it as a service through someone like us, or you can actually just buy the application, install it on your machines yourself, and it runs very well. It runs in the background like AV. As far as scanning or running them on the backup images, I think was the question. That can be done depending on service level. We offer that, and there are other applications out there that include that. Basically, they have to turn on a version of your backup and run a scan on it, and if it's clean, then it saves it. If it's not, it quarantines it, et cetera. Similar to the process I already described. So it's just, you could do it on the production environment in your office. You can also do it similarly in the cloud backups, depending on the application or your service provider. So not all of them have it. Some of them do. Some companies do. Some companies don't.
I would just like to add, if I can, onto that just a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
This is Robert. I work with Brian at Asgard, and just kind of the direct answer to preventing backup and replication targets from getting locked with ransomware is to have offsite. And whatever your offsite target is, we utilize a cloud, and that way, one of our clients that Brian has mentioned earlier, they actually had, when they were hit with ransomware, their local copies of the backups were in fact locked up, and we had to use the ones we had in the cloud. Having a separate location that is disconnected from your main site is the safest way to make sure your backups will remain safe. Having these, the SentinelOne program that Brian has mentioned is the best way to keep on-site safe continuously. But if you're worried about something tampering with those files as they sit there waiting to be used, then definitely having those off-site is the best practice.
Right, because the backups can obviously be infected too. Ransomware could sit on a network in your environment for months, and just infect every backup level. And if a client's not running an endpoint detection on their network, if it's not part of the service level that they want from us, then yeah, the backups could in fact be corrupted as well, and we've experienced that. So that just means data loss and having to go back further in time to grab those files. So that does two things. It takes more time, so it slows things down, slows your recovery down, and it could potentially cost more money because you've lost data. If the ransomware has been on your backups for a month, those 28 backups that I discussed are now not usable, and now you're having to go back to the previous month, and the data from the current month is now not usable and gone to you. So yes, there are preventative ways to do that. I agree with Robert that having it on an offsite location in the cloud is the number one way to add that level of resiliency. And then some type of scrubbing or antivirus on both of the systems makes a lot of sense to make sure that not just your production environment isn't infected, but that your backups are being double checked. So yeah, we've gone through it and it's not pleasant. And the question always comes, well, how could the backup be infected too? Well, because you've been saving corrupted backups. And then on the flip side, we've had many times where the production environment is held for ransom with encrypted files, and then the most recent backup is clean because the ransomware didn't get stored. It took effect immediately, and we were able to restore the immediate file. Right. So it depends again on the setup, but the capabilities to do all of these things are available today. And if you're unsure, like I said, we're happy to provide a free review of your DR plan, what your service level is, make some recommendations for you specifically. So.
Thanks so much, Brian. A couple more questions, so I'll just keep calling them out.
Okay.
This one is addressed to actually Gartner and you, so I can tackle it first. But the question is, do you have DR templates that we can compare our documentation against? And to the person who asked this question, actually as part of some of the free COVID-19 research that Gartner has provided on both the Gartner portal and the CISO Coalition portal, there is some research by Gartner analyst Roberta Whitty. She's really the key and leading Gartner analyst in the disaster recovery and business continuity space. And what I can do is just make sure I package that up along with Brian's slides that he shared here today when we send this out to everyone who joined the session. So I'll make sure to get that over to you. And then Brian and Robert, if you guys have anything you want to add, if you know of any resources that may have DR templates that folks could use to compare.
Yeah, I don't know any reliable resources. Like we've created our own, and we can share that information. We're not sharing. We don't really have a template. There's just a series of questions that we have answered, and then we produce one. But if someone's interested, again, we provide a free review of where you are. We can fill that in. We obviously do paid disaster recovery plans, but if you become a client, that payment gets rolled into your service. So it actually becomes an included part of your service if someone's interested in exploring that as well.
Thank you. And then last question, and just a reminder to folks, you can continue to send them through. But the last one that I'm seeing so far is if your backup is not connected, i.e. air gapped, how can you do that and still have an aggressive RTO?
Robert, do you want to field it?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like the biggest idea and the biggest break with RTOs, and there's typically a lot of people go with the 3-2-1 rule for backups. And what I was referencing earlier is typically if your main site is completely infected, let's say you're backing up to a NAS, that gets infected, and your regular backups aren't working, and your only option is a cloud. Well, we maintain an aggressive RTO because the way we set up our backups is that there's, for people that elect that service level, to stick with the way Brian is saying these things, that service level offers cold storage VMs that are your most recent backup recovered into our data center ready to go. So we can maintain that aggressive RTO by having an off-site, ready to go system image that sits there just waiting for you to, just waiting for a disaster to strike so you can turn it on and have it. So then the downtime isn't downloading the image and getting all the files over and moving everything around. The only downtime really is getting you connected to the environment. And one of the things we do when we create a full DR plan for a client is getting things like, what VLAN are you on? Are you in a virtual environment? What systems are virtual or physical? Like, we go through a lot of the configuration for those things with you hand in hand when we're first setting up the environment for those cold restores. So we maintain aggressive RTOs by just crossing all the T's, dotting all the I's ahead of time. And then we strongly recommend within your first year testing. So that way we can test VPN connectivity, how quickly we can connect you, and finding out which servers are priority for you. That's something we find out during our initial phasing anyways, is priority servers. That's always a big thing for me from the technical side. What servers are important, because for your RTOs to be met, you need to have the environment up as quickly as possible. And something like a domain controller will need to come up first before a file server. But somebody on the other side might be sitting there complaining that the file server needs to be up, but without the domain controller, they can't log into the file server, and then it just becomes a mess. But not to digress. We maintain aggressive RTOs by just staying on top of having recoveries ready to go. Whether they're on-site, off-site, wherever, you just make sure those restores are set up and up to date. And that's how you maintain that aggressive RTO at all times.
That's great, Robert. Thank you. And just a reminder, folks, I'm monitoring the chat and the Q&A. It doesn't look like anything new has come through. So I'll use this time to say a huge thank you to Brian and Robert as well for joining us. Can't thank you enough. And like I mentioned, to those still on the line, I will go ahead and share this deck. Brian has kindly offered to share that with you guys. So we will package this up along with the research I mentioned from Roberta Whitty, who's a Gartner analyst who does cover the disaster recovery space. If there's any best practices you can take away from that as well. Just looking at the chat again, doesn't look like anything else has come through. Brian, Robert, is there anything else you guys would like to say before we go ahead and wrap things up?
I would just say that, look, everyone's kind of becoming a little bit more relaxed. They're, going back to work in the office and things like that. Maybe not everybody, but some people are. And the explosion in the number of attacks that we directly saw when people moved to the work from home architecture, it was so surprising. In hindsight, it's not, because criminals will take advantage of weaknesses, but just the sheer number of phishing attempts that were going on, people trying to exploit COVID or PPE or small business financing, anything along that nature, they're trying to exploit. So just because it seems like things are going back to somewhat normal, don't let your guard down. Someone asked a question about, are people testing during this period? Yeah, they're not really, because they're looking at other things, but don't put this on the back burner. This can mean everything to your organization. The resources are there. Gartner's there. We're making an offer for a free assessment, no strings attached. Take advantage of these things. Get the free DR plan from Kristen and spend a little bit of time on it. Get it in place. Get the rest of the organization on board with it, and then you have it. And then you can forget about it, right? So that's the recommendation that I would make.
Well, thank you again, Brian and Robert, as well, for chiming in and for sharing your insights. We so appreciate you. It's nice to have you back. And with that, I'm more than happy to give everybody 4 minutes back to their busy schedule. So thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. Again, thanks, Robert. Thank you, Brian. And we will look for you all on the next Confidential Insight webinar. Thanks so much.
Perfect. Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you. Bye, guys.